Welcome to Metro. It's great to have you with us. My name is Seth Conerly. I'm one of the pastors on staff here. And you picked a great time. I guess a great time. It's the last week of a series, so if that's a good time to come, then we're glad to have you. But with that, we have been going through a couple of weeks leading up to this week. And this topic of rinse and repeat is the title. And what we're looking at is this idea of what are those habits, those things in your life that are self-detrimental, that are damaging, whether that be specifically to you or in most cases to those around you. This could be anything from the subtle nuances in your life that are inflicted upon those around you, whether you wish it to be or not, or the very debilitating things that you may have been struggling with for years and years and years. And can I tell you, most of the time, all of us struggle with something in a repetitious way. I've joked before in this series about we're not particularly creative in the way we start screwing things up. For some reason, we find one way to screw things up. We go, you know what, I think I'm just going to put this on repeat for the rest of my life and just do this over and over again. But even in that, although at least one thing is probably for you, I'm betting there's many things that you can struggle with, whether on an itemized way or more. And I've been doing a pretty great job of expressing to you all my eccentricities as it applies to those things, both small and large. And as I've been thinking about it, I've realized I've got a lot to work on, specifically as it applies to the way I ultimately annoy my wife is the short answer. Now, I'll tell you this, she didn't come to me and give me all this material. I think that needs to be put out there because you're like, wow, she's just beating that man up, just letting him know all the things. Yeah, no, not at all. But as I've been thinking about it, I even thought about one I'm about to share with you that she didn't even know about. And I probably shouldn't say it then, is the short, like, don't give her ammunition, you know what I'm saying? But like it's there. And so the two for me that I'll share with you today before we get cruising that kind of tie into this idea. One is that, and I'm going to start some fights with one or both of these. I just want you to know that, and just go ahead and just calm down. All right? It's a struggle. It's okay. There's bigger fish to fry. The first one is this. For some reason, when I lose anything, I assume my wife knows immediately where it was lost. I don't know if anybody's got that dynamic in their household where you got somebody, when you lose anything, you call them. 3 weeks ago, my wife was here at the church and having a meeting with somebody, and I was at the house working on a message, and then I got done. I was needing to head into the office. I couldn't find my keys. I want to repeat that, my keys. And I called her, interrupted her meeting, and was like, hey, do you know where my keys are? She's like, your keys? I'm in a meeting. What are you doing right now? I was like, I'm trying to find the keys. That's what I'm trying to do. And she's like, no, I don't know where the keys. So, I'm that person that as I'm gearing up, you got to do the check, right? You got to like keys, phone, wallet, like you do that whole deal before you leave the house. And inevitably, all three of those are missing at any given point. And so I'm calling her for anything and everything. Most random stuff, too. I'm like, hey, do you know where the toothpaste is? That's actually a viable question in my household. She started brushing her teeth downstairs for some reason in the morning when it's like scheduled with the kids, and she just takes that toothpaste and just like walks away with it like that's okay, and just leaves me to, I don't even know, swish water. It doesn't work. So the next thing that I do, that's a goofy one and very nuanced and specific, and you've got someone in your life that probably does this. I also believe that my wife knows the perfect amount of time that everything must be microwaved for, okay? I don't know if you've got that in your life, but I don't have confidence in my microwave knowledge. I don't. Whenever I approach the microwave, it will either just be as cold or somehow colder than it was in the refrigerator when I'm done with it, or it will be lava nuclear hot. It's like the hot pocket equation, okay? It's one or the other. When she does it, it's perfect every time. I don't know where that knowledge comes from. It's God ordained. I can only imagine, but I can tell you right now, I ain't got it. So every time I'm like, baby, how long does this need to go in the microwave for? And she reluctantly tells me. That's the one she didn't know about, so don't tell her. But that one is one I do a good bet. But I don't want to mince around about words too long today, because what I'm telling you is coming at you is some dense things within Scripture. So let's turn our brains on and not check out, because we got some stuff to cover as we dive in. So if you want to go ahead and go to Genesis 25, we're going to be starting in verse 21, and we're looking to answer the question, how do we identify and break free of destructive rhythms? And not just individually, but as we ended last week, and we'll really be emphasizing this week, those rhythms that are generational even in nature. What we have seen is, and it's very scriptural and it's very real, is that in our lives, we can see the patterns of our parents, negative or otherwise, repeated within ourselves. And conversely, if you're a parent, you'll look at those very horrifying moments where your kid kind of comes at you in a negative way and you don't see them in that moment, you see you. You know what I'm saying? You see your problems, your way you approach things, you go, oh, that is, I don't know if that's genetic, but they got it. Like, it's there. And it is a very real thing, right? And this can be minor or it can be major in many respects. And we're going to see some major examples of this in the scripture. And last week we saw that. And we're looking at 4 generations of individuals throughout the Old Testament. We're looking at Abraham, Isaac, and then now today we're going to look at Jacob and then his son Joseph. And as we look at these last week, we saw Abraham repetitiously sin as he lied about the fact that his wife was his sister to try to just survive and make it. And we talked about that, and we'll see it again, that as long as you are in a survival mentality, you're never going to be capable of thriving. And in so many instances, that's how we approach it. And Abraham was no different. And then his son Isaac did the exact same thing in the same place. He went and said that his wife Rebekah was in fact his sister to save himself. And we see the sins of the father visiting the sons. Well, specifically as we start today, we're going to be focusing on a few characters. And quite frankly, I could just park it on these families for a while because each individual has so much that they're working through. But we're having to focus on individual ones. And one that you've probably never heard focused on, and it's who we're starting with today, is Rebekah. It is Isaac's wife, who was a part of the situation last week, but now she's got her own issue that she's about to walk into with some repetitious sin that is going to visit her children. So Genesis 25 is where Isaac and Rebekah are praying for children. 21, Isaac prayed to the Lord on behalf of his wife because she was childless. And the Lord answered his prayer, and his wife Rebekah became pregnant. And the babies, plural, it was twins, jostled each other within her. And she said, why is this happening to me? So she went to inquire of the Lord. And the Lord said to her, this is key. So the Lord's given her a word on this. 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 people are from within you will be separated. One people will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger, which is very upside down in that culture. When the time came for her to give birth, there were twin boys in her womb. And the first to come out was red, and his whole body was like a hairy garment. So they named him Esau. And after this, his brother came out with his hand grasping Esau's heel, so he was named Jacob. Now, a lot of people, you may have heard this before, have said that the name Jacob because of that means deceiver. And if you're here today and your name's Jacob, I got good news for you. That's not actually what it means. It's like to come from behind, almost even usurper in and of itself because of this dynamic of what the Lord had declared and the way he literally came out of the womb, grabbing of the heel of his brother. Now, let me give you some context here, too, already to this that we're going to see that maybe will give some of you some framing, and for me, at least, it'll allow me to geek out for a couple of seconds. The best parallel or even modern application of these 2 brothers that I have for you is found within the Marvel Cinematic Universe, okay? When it comes to Esau and Jacob, what I want you to think of, if you're with me, MCU people, you got to think of Thor and Loki is who I want you to be thinking of right now, okay? Thor is the Esau character, and Jacob is going to be our Loki character. But what is flip-flopped is that in the MCU, and even Norse mythology for that matter, Thor finds himself as really the chosen, favored son. This is the what-if universe where Loki becomes the favored son, okay? And Jacob is about to find himself as the favored one, certainly to his mother, Rebekah. 27, the boys grew up, and Esau became a skillful hunter, a man of the open country. Getting that Thor vibe, right? While Jacob was content to stay at home among the tents. And as we'll see later, he is a trickster and a deceiver. 28, Isaac, and this is the key verse here that's going to catalyze some really messed up stuff for out their narrative. Isaac, who had a taste for wild game, loved Esau. So the father loved the son, but Rebekah loved Jacob. What is occurring here is that 2 parents have entered into a situation that is a pitfall that, can I encourage you, do not do so, and that is favoritism. We're going to see this over and over again throughout their story. And it, along with some other things, are going to be this repetitious, problematic sin, and it will end up visiting her very children when Rebekah goes down the road. Now, obviously, Isaac was not out of the woods with us either. It said that he was favored towards Esau. But really, the most detrimental way this is going to be manifesting is in Rebekah and her actions in the wake of this. Can I tell you, favoritism in and of itself is not okay. Even biblically speaking, very much not in alignment with what God would have. The book of James speaks to that very directly, that God does not call us to step into favor. Giving favor, looking at somebody and saying, hey, you're better than, you're more of a priority just because of any number of things that I gravitate to or prefer, whatever. It's this not okay, messed up dynamic. And you may even have that in your household or in your family or something, where when I say that, I might deeply trigger you because you go, yeah, we all know in my family who the favorite is, okay? And the reason I know is because they told me to my face. It was pretty hurtful, actually. Right? Whatever that looks like for you, it might have been actions, it might have been words, but it is damaging, and we're going to see how damaging it can be throughout this narrative. But our first point as it attaches to this is this. Destructive rhythms begin with an initial decision that we know better than God. Now, the reason that I phrase it this way is as follows. And we're going to hit it pretty directly out the gates. God looked at Rebekah and said that your second-born son, Jacob, will rule over your firstborn son, Esau. Do you remember that? Said that there was going to be this kind of upturned, not normative deal. Patriarchal dynamics were such that the firstborn son obviously ruled. So this idea was not normative in nature. And what we are going to see throughout the character of Rebekah is that instead of trusting and releasing it to God to take care of, she took matters into her own hands and decided that she didn't need God to do what he claimed and promised he would do. She would take that which God declared and forcibly make it happen on her own power. You following me? So the problem that we have at any given moment in our lives, especially when we're deceiving ourselves and falling prey to this idea of negative rhythms and things that settle in, is on a spectrum of this idea that we know better than God. One that is very deceptive that Rebekah falls to is that maybe you've been doing this whole church and Jesus thing for a long time, and you know all the answers, you know all the verses, you at least, maybe it's not that, you just conceptually at least, man, I know what God's ideal is for me. And instead of trusting him, walking in that, being patient with it, waiting on his timing, which is the key piece there, what you will do is go, I know what his ideal is, and I'm going to force it into submission on my power because I need it now, and I'm not willing to wait on him and trust him because I need control. The other end of that spectrum is just a blatant looking at God and going, I know better. Devoid of your precepts, devoid of your direction, devoid of what you're telling me, I'm telling you I know better. It is the initial sin that we started in the creation narrative in the Garden of Eden. When you see Adam and Eve, what happens? Snake steps in, one rule, don't eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And he goes, why shouldn't you eat from that? Don't you know as well as God? Don't you want to be like God? Don't you know better? Go take of it. You'll be fine. Surely you won't die. And that's where we started this whole thing, is that we figured we knew better than God. And we do that all the time. We look at him in our lives and we go, you know what? I know that this is damaging for me. I know this is a potential for this to harm somebody in my life. But I've worked it out, and I know better. This context, this situation, these reasonings, because of my wiring, whatever you want to go at, I'm good to go. So we've got to be careful that we don't start in a place of we know better than God. I want to give you some action steps again like I did last week. These aren't in your notes or anything, so feel free to write them down if you want. But the action step with this one is we've got to recognize that we aren't God and seek his desires for our life on his timing. So we've got to look at what we're doing, what we're approaching, the way we're going at something and go, you know what? Is this thing that I am engaging in, is it God glorifying? And am I giving it to him to pursue his will, but also on his terms and his timing? This is something crazy we're going to see throughout this. You can try to strive towards something good and godly and do it in a sinful way. That sounds pretty messed up, but we're going to see Rebekah do it actively. So Genesis 27:5. So what has occurred up to this point, and we don't have time to hit all these characters. Jacob in particular has some crazy stuff, and typically when you study this, you study Jacob, but we're studying Rebekah. And so what occurs is that Jacob deceives Esau and takes his birthright. So there's two things at play in this narrative that are key. There is the birthright and the blessing, and we're going to see the blessing here in just a minute. But the birthright is what you would probably be thinking of. It's the inheritance that the firstborn son supposedly is supposed to inherit in this situation. And Jacob deceives his brother for just some food when he's famished to take his birthright, and he does. And Esau is pretty mad about that in the wake of it. And what we're about to see is the blessing. And the blessing was this deeply spiritual, family, kind of ritualistic thing that occurred in that time, where a father on his deathbed typically would speak a blessing over his children. And typically the firstborn would get this big extra blessing. And there was this fruition that came to it that was very typically active and occurring. Like it was like whenever they said, boom, this blessing on you, when you look at scripture, typically it occurs when they say that. There's a supernatural element even to it in these days. And so with that, it was a coveted thing. Children wanted the blessing of their parent. And so where we're going to be landing is Jacob's already got the birthright. He's already got the inheritance, but now, even beyond that, the blessing. Now what has started, and this is key for the Rebekah narrative, is that in the verse, we're 27:5, at the end of chapter 26, it says that Rebekah and Isaac are very disappointed, heartbroken, and crushed because Esau married a Hittite woman. That's what it says. That he stepped outside of their people, stepped outside of that, and marries this woman, this pagan worshiping woman, and it crushed them. And as we're going to see in this narrative, it crushed Rebekah. I'm going to tell you right now, if any of y'all have some problems with approval from parents when it comes to you getting married, you're going to get triggered real hard here in just a bit. I just want to warn you, okay? So Rebekah, not in any way in favor of what it is that Esau has done. And then she decides that she's going to take further actions in her justified crusade. Now, Rebekah was listening as Isaac spoke to his son Esau. And when Esau left for the open country to hunt game and bring it back, his son was getting this because Isaac had said, hey, grab this food, cook it for me, and I'm going to give you the blessing. Rebekah said to her son Jacob, look, I overheard your father say to your brother Esau, bring me some game and prepare me some tasty food to eat so that I might give you my blessing in the presence of the Lord before I die. Now, my son, listen carefully and do what I tell you. Go out to the flock and bring me 2 choice young goats so I can prepare some tasty food for your father just the way he likes it. And take it to your father to eat so that he may give you his blessing before he dies. Jacob said to Rebekah, his mother, but my brother Esau is a hairy man while I have smooth skin. What if my father touches me? I would appear to be tricking him and would bring down a curse on myself rather than a blessing. 13, his mother said to him, manipulation. My son, let the curse fall on me. Just do what I say. Go and get them for me. And what occurs is she cooks this meal. She even gets even more conniving and puts goat skin on her son's arms so that when his father feels him, it will feel hairy like his brother. And sure enough, Jacob ends up taking the blessing, and he's just doubled down on things, and he's got both the inheritance and the blessing. And Esau, as you can imagine, is slightly mad. And his mother has done this to him. And what you're going to see throughout this is that you got 2 things at play repetitiously in her life. 1, you've got her saying, I know better than God, and I'm going to force that which God has declared on my terms. And 2, in her unhealth in doing so, she is going to use other sinful things to consistently justify it. The one in particular she's going to circle back to over and over again is her disappointment in Esau because of who he married. She's going to justify her behavior, justify her wickedness, justify her problems because she goes, I knew better and my son didn't listen to me. And therefore, I am justified in my behavior. I am justified in what I am doing. Whew. 2, we allow negative validation to empower our destructive rhythms. We even can get to a place where bad things, like a bad perspective point, like her perspective on her son and everything. Because hear me, later on, we see that even her thinking is not outside of even what God will actually declare for the Israelites later. His kind of holiness laws say, hey, we're not going to intermarry with pagans and people who are not glorifying God. That is not what I would have for you, is what he says in those early days of those people. But that hadn't even been declared yet. But hear me. So what she's saying is not inherently wrong. What she is working towards is not inherently wrong, but her means and mode are wicked because they are debilitatingly controlling. They are self-glorifying and justifying, and they ain't about God. They're about her and about her stuff and what she thinks needs to happen on her time as she seeks to control her household as she sees fit. We allow negative validation to empower destructive rhythms. If you can't tell, we got some heavy stuff we're talking about today. So as you know, I try to do some nice commercial breaks with some lighthearted joking so that we can ease the pain, okay? I don't like to pour alcohol straight into the wound, you know what I'm saying? Rubbing alcohol right on that don't work so well. I'll give you some ice cream every once in a while. So speaking of which, I struggle with these types of things in negative validation when it comes to, and I think many of us can relate to this, on a small scale as it applies to when I probably shouldn't have dessert. Or second dessert, depending on your perspective. I really like sweets. And if you want to talk about it visiting the next generation, I have instilled it deeply in my oldest daughter. She is, wow. Her and I sneak sweets all the time. I don't know that it's a positive thing I've instilled in my daughter, but we will hide in the laundry room and eat Reese's Cups all day long if Mama's not looking. It is a real thing. We have a little tin that sits on top of there right there, and we'll get it, and we'll just sit there like little chipmunks, and we'll hide in the corner. It's amazing. It's bonding. And so with that, I struggle at times to say, you probably shouldn't, you should probably not go for a second helping of those sweets, Seth. You probably should. That's probably not the wise decision for you right now. And I don't know if any of you are like this. I approach life sometimes like every day's Thanksgiving. Anybody with me? Where I will go at it and I'll go, man, I am full right now, but that looks good, and I'm going for it as well. And then what do? We regret it for a while after that as our stomach screams at us. And in so many instances of our lives, we can look at something that is a good thing. I mean, can we be real? Ice cream is fantastic. The biggest thing right now for me is detriment is that Andy's over in St. Louis has something they do this time of year. You're welcome in advance for those of you who are going to be in that area soon. Andy, specifically, who bought out Bobby's here locally, they take a concrete and they take a literal chunk of key lime pie. They shove it in that concrete and they put it together because they want you to know what heaven feels like in tasting this. That's what they want you to know, and it is that. Shove some cookie dough in there and you'll pass slap out. It is fantastic, okay? And anytime we're in St. Louis, it does not matter at this season of the year, July to August. I know the date in which it cuts off. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how much I've eaten. It doesn't matter what we've done. I will get in a fight over the fact that we have not stopped at Andy's to get that, okay? Probably not the wisest thing for me to do that, but I'll justify it. It's only once a year, Taylor. It's only once a year, okay? I won't be able to eat it for like a lot more months, okay? So we got to eat it now, all right? Every time we're there. I'll justify it any way I can so I can get a hold of it. And man, there's so many times where I've done that and I've regretted it. Well, here's an action step for you as it applies to these things when we use negative validation to empower ultimately our problematic rhythms. Is we've got to find healthy points of perspective. And we talked about this in a larger sense last week with this idea of accountability. You need sounding boards. You need people to speak into you. You need other perspective points. Spiritually speaking, one of those is Scripture. That's a perspective point you need. For me, as it applies to as much ice cream as I eat, that would be just a general Google search on healthy decisions. That's all I need as a perspective point. When it comes to your interactions with people, we talked last week about being courageous enough to ask people how you're coming across and what you're doing and how it's affecting them. The goofy way in which that manifests for me as it applies to my absurd example is that I had a rough interaction not too long ago that I felt hurt by, but I realized later it was accountability. Once again, don't tell her I said so. But we were coming back from a hangout with some friends here locally, and we just had a spread, friend. Can I tell you? Oh, great food. It was a grill out. They had all kinds of desserts and things, and I was getting after it. Loved it. Fantastic. And we get done, and we're driving home, and my wife, who is very good about what she eats and portions and all that kind of stuff, she had not really taken anything in reference to dessert. And so as we're driving home, she goes, you know what? I think I want to stop at McDonald's and get a nice little soft serve cone. So we pull up, and we stop, and she's going to go in and get this. And I said, baby, give me one of them M&M McFlurries while you're in there. Just grab one. Just whatever size. Don't get a small. Get that and bring it back to me, all right? And she looked at me. It was the most judged I felt in so long. She looked at me up and down. She goes, you don't need one. And she just walked in and bought her something. She didn't get me a McFlurry. I felt so insulted. But I'm telling you, you need perspective in your life of people who are going to be honest with you in those moments where you're rhythmically going at something like you don't need to, who are going to lovingly, more lovingly than that, tell you that you're outside of where God would have you to be. So with that, let's keep cruising. As we see Rebekah ultimately doubling down in this next passage on her issues. Genesis 27, verse 41. So Esau held a grudge against Jacob because of the blessing his father had given him. And he said to himself, remember this next section because it's going to come up in a couple of points with Joseph. He said to himself, this is Esau talking, the day of mourning for my father are near, meaning his dad's about to die. Then I will kill my brother. When Rebekah was told what her older son Esau had said, she sent for her younger son Jacob and said to him, your brother Esau is planning to avenge himself by killing you. All the stuff she did, P.S. Now then, my son, do what I say. Flee at once to my brother Laban in Haran. Stay with him for a while until your brother's fury subsides. And when your brother is no longer angry with you and forgets what you did to him, I'll send word for you to come back from there. Why should I lose both of you in one day? Here's where it's going to make your skin stand up, all right? 46. Then Rebekah went to Isaac. So he's about to die. Keep this in mind. And she sends his son off away without any word, possibly to never be seen again in his lifetime, without any explanation. And this is the justification she has when she goes back to her husband. I'm disgusted with living because of these Hittite women. If Jacob takes a wife from among the women of this land, from Hittite women like these, my life will not be worth living. You see it? She had gone back at the beginning. She had justified her favoritism. She had looked at Esau's decisions that weren't in alignment with what she thought was ideal for her household. And now as she looks to double down on justifying why she did the blessing, why she's the cause of the very animosity in her household, the very reason that one son is trying to kill the other, in that moment, she doubles down on her false justification to the point that she's literally going, my life's not worth living if Jacob marries one of these women like Esau did. So I sent him away. That's why I did it. If you're mad at me, you can get over it because I'm not dealing with this again. Master manipulation and self-justification at play. 3 is this: we double down on our false justifications and things spiral. You know what I'm talking about? It goes back to that idea of surviving versus thriving. If you're in the water and you're swimming and you're just, you're getting after it and you've trained for it and you know what you're doing, You're thriving. You'll even think about different ways to swim. Man, I'm going to do the backstroke today. Let's do a butterfly. Let's do whatever. I'm thinking that's thriving. That's swimming with purpose, right? But if you're in a situation where you don't know how to swim or you've just gotten so tired that you can't go on and you're actively drowning, you're no longer in a thriving mentality. And people who are drowning don't think things through logically. They flounder and flail, and if you make the mistake of getting close to them in that moment, they might even drag you down with them. And that's what happens to us when we get in this space of like, and we just get emotional and reactive and self-justifying, and we're looking at our negative reasoning, and we're just doubling down on the fact that it's justified. It makes sense to me. I've worked, you just don't understand the context of what I'm going through, what I'm living through, what's happened to me, what's happened to this. I'm just trying to prevent this happening in my own family. I can just, right? I can go from every angle and just hit every type of way. Because there's so many nuanced ways in which this can manifest for each and every one of us. But the idea is that when we feel attacked, instead of recognizing that maybe, what we are doing is problematic and damaging, what we will do is we will build those walls up even bigger. And we'll put turrets on them. And we'll go on the offensive. And both us and those around us will begin to spiral. And it will even, in Rebecca's instance, it pretty much destroys your family. And for many of us, that could be down the road for us as well if we're not careful. We double down on our false justifications and things spiral. Action step on this one is this, is we've got to recognize our triggers, the things that are causal in our behavior, and prepare ourselves for when they show up. We got to be proactive, not reactive. And step into those moments with grave intentionality. See the train coming. Don't just stand on the tracks and be like, wow, is that a star in the distance? No, that's the headlights to a train that's going to run your rear over, all right? You need to get off the tracks, all right? And there's so many times in our lives that we just sit there and go, well, it's still pretty, though. I think I'll be fine. I can get off at the last second. It definitely won't, and you're dead. Like you can't. You've got to know what's coming, prepare yourself for it, and react accordingly. Otherwise, it's going to run you over every time. Now we're going to move forward in time. Good bit. And we're moving on to Jacob's sons. He had 12 of them. And he has one in particular named Joseph. Joseph is the guy that you've heard about if you're a big fan of musical theater and you've heard of Joseph and the Technicolor Dreamcoat. That is very loosely based on this narrative, okay? And what is going on is that Jacob is about to fall prey to the same trap his mama did. He is going to be doing favoritism at full force. He's got 12 sons, not 2, 12. And he is going to look at one. Not only is he going to say he's his favorite, he is going to make for him a custom jacket that screams, I love him more than the rest of you. It's literally what he does. And it is going to get interesting. Genesis 37, 3-4 says this. Now Israel, or Jacob, his name had changed, much like Abram to Abraham. Israel, or Jacob, loved Joseph more than any of his other sons. Great starting point, bud. Because he had been born to him in his old age, and he made an ornate robe for him. And when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word of him. And what we're going to see happen over the course of that narrative, we ain't got time to go verse by verse with it, but what occurs is his brothers go, you know what, we're going to kill him. And thankfully, in the act in which they're trying to make that occur, one of them steps and goes, maybe we don't kill him. Maybe we just sell him into slavery. They're like, fine, we'll do that. So they sell him into slavery at 17 years of age. His life gets worse and worse until he's 30. So all throughout these years, it's getting worse. So he's in slavery. He finally gets in a nice setup, nice job, nice household, and then he gets framed for something he didn't do, gets put in prison, all this kind of crazy stuff. So until he's 30, his life just gets worse and worse and worse. And it's because of nothing he has done. That's what I want you to hear too. Nothing he's done. The favoritism wasn't his decision. His actions moving on that got him in prison were things he did not do. And yet, he is suffering. And it isn't until he's literally 30 that he sees any sort of interaction that goes well for him. And it isn't until he's 39 that he sees his family again. So, as we look at this problematic thing happening within this household, and Jacob's behavior and favoritism visiting him, just as his mother had it, 4 our destructive rhythms frequently show up in those we influence, which is almost a direct repeat of a point we talked about last week. That your spheres of influence and the scope of people you pour into are such that when you behave a certain way, let alone if you do it repetitiously, inflict that upon those around you, especially those you care about, there's a strange and eerie likelihood that you will begin to see those same things in them. There might even be a part of you who is sitting here right now going, man, I am the Jacob in this scenario where the Rebecca was my mom or my dad and they did all this stuff, and I have terrifying moments where the things that were inflicted upon me are things I will actively see myself doing, and it horrifies me. I got good news for you as we move forward. But in all of that, I want you to be in that place of self-assessment. Where does that find you? Where are you at in that regard? And are you actively, more than anything in this point, the one who is taking that repetition in your life and copying and pasting it into the next generation? Our action step is the exact same as I said last week because it bears repeating and emphasis. And it's simply this, is we've got to own our part, apologize, and take steps towards healing. If you want to see resolution to the things you've done, hear me, your family and the people who have dealt with that want you to find that healing, and they want to step into that. But it's going to take all three of those. Acknowledgement that it was a thing, apologizing for it, and taking steps to remedy it. Because if you don't do that last one, the rest of it was just lip service. You've got to step into that with grave intentionality. And hear me, they want to cheer you on the whole way because they want to see that victory in you over that thing that has afflicted you for so long. Let's keep cruising. So as I told you, it's not until he's 30 that Joseph finds himself in a pretty great context in his life. Specifically, he is in prison. He finally, through God's power, makes his way out of prison and more or less to the right hand of Pharaoh in Egypt. So we're almost full circle. We started with Pharaoh whenever Abraham was interacting, and we're at a different Pharaoh now with Joseph. And Joseph is in a place of great influence. And once again, full circle from last week, there's about to be a drought that hits the land. And because the surrounding region does not have replenishable water sources, and only Egypt does, everybody's going to want to come to Egypt. And Joseph preemptively has even stored up the storehouses to prepare for this because God's let him know it's coming. And so everything's going great for Egypt. All this stuff's happening. And sure enough, Joseph's brothers are not in a place where they can self-sustain anymore, and they need to go to Egypt. And Joseph looks one day, and sure enough, his brothers stand before him in his court and are asking for help and food. And one, they don't even recognize him. And there's a lot that could be done here. I mean, he has the authority, quite frankly, to just kill him if he wanted to. But he doesn't. And he offers them in with open arms, and he brings them into a place, and this is a cool one for us locally, to a place called Goshen. Now, if that doesn't raise anything in you, let me enlighten you. This area in the Metro East is known as Goshen. Certainly back in the day it was. There's actually a preacher who came to the area when it was undeveloped and looked at it. And because Goshen in this context is the land of plenty in Egypt that it speaks to, he looked at the land in which we live and he said, man, this is God's plentiful area. I call it Goshen. And so when you see Goshen in the business titles and stuff like that, it's actually tethered to this passage that we're looking at. And so with that, he not only takes his brothers in, but brings them into the land of plenty in Goshen. And they are living in abundance. It's all this amazing things. And you're going to be a little bit triggered to what occurs with Esau previously in Genesis 50 as we wrap up. Genesis 50:15. When Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said. Now I want you to be thinking about what happened earlier with Esau. Esau said that his father was getting close to death. And what did he say he was going to do when his father died? He was going to go what? He was going to go kill Jacob. He was justified in it. He'd done him wrong 6 ways from Sunday. But right here, we've got something going on that's pretty intense. He's got 12 brothers, and quite frankly, they did him way worse than Esau was done. They sent him into slavery. He had to suffer through prison, all these things. But Joseph, being a man of God, has chosen a different path, as we're going to see here. So when Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, what if Joseph holds a grudge against us and pays us back for all the wrongs we did to him? So they sent word to Joseph saying, your father left these instructions before he died. This is what you are to say to Joseph. I ask you to forgive your brothers the sins and the wrongs they committed in treating you so badly. Now please forgive the sins of the servants of God, of your father. And when their message came to him, Joseph wept. Pause before we go any further. Theologians and historians are not in agreement on whether or not the brothers were lying or that was actually what their father had said. But devoid of either of those things, Joseph weeps, and this is his response. His brothers then came and threw themselves down before him. "We are your slaves," irony, they said. But Joseph said to them, "Don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God? You intended to harm me, but God intended for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives," in the season of drought and how he was able to provide for people. "So then, don't be afraid. I will provide for you and your children." And he reassured them and spoke kindly to them. This is a big one, okay? And I'll get emotional just with the point, because this is what it's going to take for you and your family. 5 is for destructive rhythms to end, for generational sin to end. It takes someone willing to give it to God. I did not say it takes someone capable of breaking the shackles. I did not say it takes someone who is strong enough to overcome it. I said it takes someone willing to give it to God. Even if you know God's ideal, don't try to force it. Don't try to do it on your own power. Don't try to be the one that controls that toxicity into your family, into submission. That's not what it's saying. You got to give it to God and wait for his timing and approach it biblically and scripturally and with love and sincerity. Truth nonetheless, it has to be there. And both sides of the narrative here are pretty powerful, because you've got the individuals who inflicted this upon their brother, who are owning up to what they did, apologizing, and as we see in the narrative beyond this, their relationship grows and develops in a very positive way. It's good, and so they did what they said they were going to do. They healed the relationship on their side, which was necessary. But it took Joseph not doing this and doing this and forgiving. I'm going to wig you out even more. So not only is he breaking the generational curse, not falling prey to what his grandmother did, not falling prey to what his dad did, not falling prey to saying, when my father dies, I'm going to kill him like his uncle did. He had it from every angle. He said, I know what God has called me to. I've seen what he's done in my life, and devoid of what you did, God intended it for good. Another piece that's key that we talked about is this, is he looks at it, and the first response he says is, don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God? He doesn't think he knows more than God. He's released it to God. And the book of Genesis, this is a powerful one for you. The book of Genesis starts with a man and a woman looking at God and saying, we want to be in your place and know better. And it ends with a man named Joseph saying, I am not better than God. I am not greater than he. And therefore I will not try my way, but I will submit to his. So can I tell you, walk in that. Give it to the Lord. It may take you being the one that says, you know what, devoid of what my family is doing, devoid of the people in my life, whether they're making decisions for health, I've decided that it ends here. And for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. As for me and my life, I will not fall prey to these rhythms of toxicity. I'm giving it to God, and I'm walking in what he has called me to. And it's going to take that. Give it to him. Don't let toxicity, don't let abuse, don't let those things control you anymore, because they bring nothing to you. There's a God whose hands are wide open. His arms are willing to embrace. His hand is reaching to you and wants to bring you in and heal you and restore you and be your everything and be your true, healthy, all-encompassing Heavenly Father, so that even if you don't even know what the word loving Father means, he wants to show you. So let's break some chains, not by our own power, but let's give it to Jesus. Let's pray. Father in heaven, I thank you that you are good, and that it is not through our power, but by yours and yours alone, that the pain and the weight and the destructive things that have been even afflicted upon us, that through your power we can get out from underneath them, that we can cast those things aside and leave them at the feet of the cross. No longer perpetuating in health or abuse, but moving towards your health, and your love, and joy, and peace that we haven't known in years. I pray for those who may be in the position of needing to self-assess and recognize that they're doing the damage, that you will be able to speak into their lives your love, your grace, your mercy, your healing, your desire to restore, because your hope in their life is the reality that you can and will restore them. You are not a God of guilt. You are a God of restoration. May we walk in that. In your name we pray. Amen.